A chilly October morning in 2015 began with an unusual commotion on a small mountainside road in Hazard, Kentucky. 6 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of a single-story wooden house nestled deep in the Appalachian fog. Neighbors peeked through their curtains as officers in bulletproof vests, bearing FBI and Kentucky State Police badges, positioned themselves around the area. Inside, 42-year-old Tim Grant was preparing his morning coffee, a routine he had maintained consistently for the past 7 years as a quiet mechanical technician, a reserved neighbor who was always punctual for work. A rapid knock sounded at 7:32 a.m. Timothy Grant, Kentucky State Police. "We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the 2008 disappearance of Leslie Grant and her 2 young children." The officers later recounted that Tim's hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee cup, but his face remained strangely calm, as if he had been waiting for this moment for nearly a decade. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. The winter of 2008 cast a heavy gray over the Pine Mountain region of Letcher County, Kentucky. The cold, damp air clung to every pine branch, while swirling fog enveloped the steep slopes, making the winding roads dark and slick as if coated in oil. A persistent rain had been falling since morning, heavy drops pounding steadily on the roof overhangs, mingling with the howling wind through the deep mountain passes. Near dusk, Leslie Grant's 1974 green Ford Maverick rolled out of the small town of Whitesburg, carrying her 2 young children on the way back to Cumberland. The old car, its paint faded, had dim yellow headlights piercing through the thick fog like smoke. The narrow mountain road was barely wide enough for one vehicle, flanked by damp rock walls and dense black pine forest. Slippery road warning signs leaned crookedly, their letters blurred by the rain. Inside the car, Leslie gripped the steering wheel tightly, the wipers working non-stop, the engine humming steadily in the warm cabin. The 2 children dozed in the back seat, wrapped in thin blankets, their heads leaning against each other with every curve. Along the way, no oncoming traffic appeared, only the faint squeal of tires on the wet pavement and the flickering yellow glow of old streetlights through the downpour. At sharp bends, visibility was obscured by thick white fog. A man living near Linefork Creek later recalled seeing the lights of a green vehicle turn into the pass and then vanish behind the pines, never reappearing on the next stretch of road. Night fell quickly, the rain growing heavier. As the clock in Leslie's home ticked past 8, the small house in Cumberland remained lit. Her mother sitting by the window, staring out at the empty hillside road. No engine sound, no headlights appeared. The phone rang repeatedly, but no one answered. When the rain finally stopped, only the wind remained, whistling through the wooden wall cracks. Late into the night, her mother grew worried. The family called Tim Grant, Leslie's husband, to ask for news, but he said she had left the house early and was probably on her way. As the clock edged toward midnight, the silence became oppressively heavy. No one in the house could sleep. A relative finally picked up the phone and contacted the Letcher County Sheriff's Office to report that Leslie and her 2 children had vanished. The report was logged in the night duty book, amid the sound of scattered rain on the porch, marking the start of a disappearance in the quiet Appalachian Mountains, where darkness seemed to swallow every trace of the mother and her 2 children on that wet mountain pass. At the other end of town, the Letcher County Sheriff's Office remained lit. The duty officer immediately forwarded the report to Sheriff Gene Dalton, who was staying late. He entered the duty room, took the handwritten notes still dotted with raindrops, on which a few lines were hastily scrawled. Woman, 29 years old, 2 children missing, route, Whitesburg, Cumberland. Vehicle, 1974, Ford Maverick, green, white top. Dalton read it once, made notes in red pen, then ordered an official case file to be opened. Assigned code hash, thick Y08117. As he glanced at the clock, it had just passed 1 in the morning. Outside, rain drizzled lightly, cold wind sweeping through the bare trees. Dalton turned on his desk lamp, spread out the county topographic map, and circled in red ink the mountain road section connecting Highway 119 through Pine Mountain, where numerous slide-offs had been recorded. He also circled the side road along Line Fork Creek, a stream flowing into the Cumberland River, deep water with strong currents. While Dalton reviewed, the dispatcher called the reporter back to confirm when Leslie left Whitesburg. The relative replied, "She left in the afternoon taking the 2 kids, said she'd be home in 2 hours." Recalculating the distance, Dalton noted the loss of contact had lasted nearly 7 hours, enough to initiate an emergency search. He called the local fire chief and the search and rescue team leader, ordering personnel to assemble at the office early the next morning. Dawn broke gray, low clouds covering the pine forest. By around 8, the parking lot behind the sheriff's building was full of vehicles. 6 officers, 4 firefighters, and 3 volunteers were present. They wore reflective jackets, carrying radios, headlamps, rescue ropes, and old metal detectors. Dalton stepped out of the office, his voice hoarse. "We start on the main road, expand to side roads, check the riverbanks, maintain contact every 15 minutes." He divided the search area into 3 directions: Highway 119 along the mountainside, side roads leading to old residential areas, and the Cumberland River Strip. A field command post was temporarily set up at an abandoned ranger station near Line Fork Creek. Before departing, he ordered full documentation of the scene and hourly activity logs to avoid errors. As the convoy left the town center, the rain had eased, only thick fog clinging to the road. Dim yellow headlights cut through sharp curves, reflecting off glistening puddles. Dalton, with 2 officers, led the way, stopping to question scattered hillside residents. A middle-aged man said he had seen green vehicle lights turn into the curve near Line Fork the previous night, then disappear into the fog. Dalton recorded the statement, marked the coordinates, and relayed the info via radio to the second team scanning the parallel lower road. Searchers spread out, radios crackling steadily in the damp cold. The morning dragged slowly, thick fog and light rain limiting visibility to a few dozen meters. The fire team checked soft soil along embankments. The SAR team used anchored ropes to probe steep slopes. No debris, tire marks, or unusual objects were found. By noon, Dalton ordered expansion southward to where the creek met the Cumberland River. The volunteer team launched inflatable boats, scanning whirlpool areas, but finding no unusual signs. Toward evening, cold wind rose, the sky darkened, and teams withdrew to the rally point. Dalton stood by the command truck, raincoat caked in mud, writing the first lines of the report. Travel route identified. No physical evidence, no traces. Continue expanded search. As rescue vehicles turned off their lights and headed down the mountain, fog rolled in again, swallowing the last streaks of light on the narrow road. Pine Mountain returned to silence, only wind and light rain blending into the cold night, ending the first fruitless search day. The next morning, the sky remained overcast, low clouds over Pine Mountain's peak. The search and rescue team began the second day with a plan to thoroughly scan the entire Highway 119, the only road connecting Whitesburg and Cumberland. Temperatures dropped below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, cold wind and thick fog patches, severely limiting visibility. Dalton stood at the field command post near Line Fork Creek, radio in hand, checking frequencies before reassigning personnel. 4 patrol vehicles split into 3 small groups moving in both directions, one group heading up toward the pass, the other 2 fanning out to lower slopes. Each group had at least 1 technician for filming and a medic on standby. At the starting point, the wet road glistened, fresh mud ruts deep from rescue tires. Searchers moved slowly, eyes scanning both sides. They stopped at every curve, shining headlamps down embankments and through roadside brush. This area was notorious for landslides in rainy seasons, with slick rocks mixed in mud, some spots having small streams from uphill runoff. Dalton ordered the upper group to check the steel guardrail section where many slide-offs had occurred. 2 officers leaned over, searching for paint chips, metal scratches, or plastic fragments, but the rail was intact, only covered in wet moss. Below, the second group used safety ropes along the mountainside, probing soft soil sections. Metal detectors beeped briefly, but only detected old cans and rusted wire. Nearby, volunteers checked the riverbank, water high and murky after days of rain, fast currents carrying branches and debris. They dropped marker buoys along the river to track flow, hoping for unusual floating objects, but the surface was empty. Throughout the morning, groups moved deliberately through curves, recording data with body cams. Northern cold wind carried moisture through collars, their breath forming white puffs. On the radio, Dalton maintained constant contact, asking each team for progress. Responses were uniform: no tire tracks, no skid marks, no broken objects. Near noon, rain returned heavier, forcing temporary shelter in vehicle cabins. Dalton spread the map, marking completed areas in red. He decided to reapproach the large bridge over Line Fork Creek, the point a witness had mentioned. There they inspected pavement, bridge pillars, drainage gaps. Under the bridge, thick black mud showed water recession, but no slide grooves or tire ruts. 2 technicians crouched to photograph, sample mud for analysis, then sent preliminary reports via radio. Dalton leaned on the bridge rail, gazing into the distance where white fog blanketed the winding pass. Distant truck engines echoed then faded. He signaled the southern group to continue to the road's end, where it branched toward Cumberland. They checked forest trails and clearings where a vehicle might turn around. Some old tire marks remained, but tread measurements didn't match the Ford Maverick. In the afternoon, as light faded, teams returned to command. Dalton called for reports. Groups read results one by one: no accident signs, no matching evidence, no new witnesses. All they had was the rain-soaked road and absolute silence. He logged results in the record, noting time, location, weather, temporary conclusion. No evidence of collision or clear accident. Outside, rain fell steadily, light drops, tapping the post roof, mixing with radio static in the lit command room. On the map, search markings covered nearly all of Highway 119, but the largest gap remained the western forest, where fog hadn't lifted in 2 days. Dalton folded the map, staring through the fogged window, rescue headlights blurring into hazy glows in the dark. The initial search phase ended in full darkness, and the cold mountain road still revealed no trace of the vehicle that vanished in the rain 2 nights earlier. The next morning, Pine Mountain remained shrouded in thick fog, scattered rain continuing from the night. After a brief meeting at the ranger station, Sheriff Gene Dalton ordered expanded search to cover the entire Line Fork Creek area and side roads parallel to Highway 119. 12 search and rescue members were reassigned, 4 for the pass road, 3 for the riverbank, the rest supporting aerial operations. A fire department helicopter was dispatched from Hazard, equipped with thermal cameras and infrared lenses, to film the entire eastern hillside. As rotors spun, wind scattered dry leaves and mud around the landing pad, tearing fog into misty strips. Dalton stood below watching, radio in hand, voice hoarse from cold. Focus scanning from the Line Fork Junction westward. Report immediately any reflections or unusual shapes. On the ground, road teams followed narrow gravel side roads, flanked by low damp earthen walls. Rain made surfaces slippery, rescue tires repeatedly bogging down. Another group launched inflatable boats into Line Fork River, water fast and swirling, thick with fresh soil. They probed banks with handheld metal detectors, signals beeping constantly on buried metal, mostly rusted cans and old wire. Overhead, the helicopter circled, sending images to command. Cold color blocks appeared on the small screen. Pine forest, gravel beds, rock slopes and puddles. No unusual heat signatures. Near noon, heavier rain reduced aerial visibility, forcing the pilot to pause. On the ground, Dalton allowed short breaks in truck cabins, warming with portable gas heaters. He reviewed the map, extending red markings to northeastern side roads, trails outdated on official maps for years. A volunteer mentioned recent landslide near the creek edge. He ordered immediate check. Upon arrival, sideways rain, mushy mud ground, fallen trees blocking the path. They left vehicles, carrying hand lamps and rescue ropes, advancing into the slide. Slippery mud made each step laborious, water rushing softly below. The technician activated the metal detector, scanning the slide bank. Signals beeped intermittently. At first thought to be interference from underlying rock, but midway down the slope, the signal strengthened, beeping steadily. The mud surface was slick, mixed with branches and small rocks. The technician knelt, probing with a rod, hitting something hard about 8 inches under the soil. Unable to identify, he marked the spot with a red plastic stake and withdrew. Dalton, via radio, logged coordinates, ordered the area secured, and deeper access delayed for better weather. By afternoon, heavy rain returned, water pouring down slopes like silver sheets. Road teams withdrew from the landslide due to ongoing slide risk. Members packed gear, maintaining contact with the boat group docking downstream. Overhead, the helicopter returned low, circled once more, then vanished behind dark clouds. Dalton stood by the creek, watching murky water carry leaves and wood fragments, raincoat mud-caked. He checked his watch, confirming end of third-day operations. The day's report noted, scanned Line Fork Creek and side roads, poor weather, no accident signs. Noted coordinates of landslide area with possible buried metal object, access pending. As the rescue convoy returned to base, dusk fell, headlights casting long beams through persistent rain into fog. Dalton gripped the radio tightly, eyes fixed on the western hills where lightning flashed briefly, then vanished, leaving low thunder rumbling around Pine Mountain, sinking into darkness. On the fourth morning of the search, with rain stopped but fog still cloaking the mountainside, Sheriff Gene Dalton decided to temporarily halt field operations and shift focus to information from the victim's family. Tim Grant, Leslie's husband, was invited to the Letcher County Sheriff's headquarters for an official statement. He arrived around 9 a.m., tall and thin, wearing a faded gray jacket, looking tired but composed. Dalton interviewed him in a small interrogation room, white light glaring on the scratched wooden table. He started with basic questions: when Leslie left, the trip's purpose, their marriage status. Tim answered briefly, voice even. She left around 5 p.m., driving the kids to Cumberland to visit her mother. There were no issues between us. She did that often. Dalton noted every word, then asked for more details about the time before she left. Tim said he was in the kitchen, Leslie packing for the kids, light rain starting outside. When asked if anyone else witnessed, he replied, "No, just the 3 of them." During the interview, another officer reported that Tim's neighbors had given differing statements. The next-door homeowner said around 5, she heard arguing from their house, female voice high, male low, followed by a car door slamming hard and loud engine revving. When confronted, Tim appeared surprised, saying the neighbor might have mistaken the TV, since he was watching football, insisting no conflict occurred. Dalton made no comment, only asked him to recount the entire afternoon sequence. Tim repeated that Leslie left in a normal mood, not angry or stressed. He asked about their recent relationship. Tim hesitated, then said, "We were separated briefly but still talked for the kids. Nothing serious." Police noted this detail and requested his personal schedule for the night of the incident. Tim stated after Leslie left, he stayed home, ate dinner, went to a friend's to watch the game, left around 9 p.m., went home, and slept. Dalton asked for the friend's name for verification. Tim provided one with an address in northern town. While investigators checked authenticity, Dalton continued about the vehicle Leslie used. Tim confirmed joint ownership. He had repaired the ignition months earlier. The car ran fine. Asked last time he saw the vehicle, Tim said that morning when Leslie used it for shopping, and the same evening she drove it away. Dalton quietly observed the man opposite, noting unnaturally calm demeanor. The stenographer noted Tim answered slowly, no anxiety, repeating the same details. The interview lasted over 2 hours, ending with Dalton reading back the content and requiring signature. Before leaving, Tim asked briefly, "If there's any new information, you'll let me know, right?" Dalton nodded, saying police were doing everything possible. After he left, Dalton reopened notes, marking inconsistencies in red between the statement and neighbor info. Departure time argument sounds, Leslie's demeanor leaving. He pinned the note to the board beside the search route diagram covered in red pins. Outside the window, still murky, fog lingering, dim white light filtering through condensation-streaked glass. Dalton closed the notebook, leaned back, the room feeling thickened by prolonged silence. He knew this interview yielded no conclusion, but contradictions between statement and witnesses prompted a brief temporary note. Statement inconsistencies. Continue verification. Immediately after completing the interrogation with Tim Grant, Sheriff Gene Dalton returned to his office and requested the technical department to coordinate with a local carrier to retrieve all communication data for Leslie Grant on the day she went missing. The report came back that afternoon, including a detailed log of calls and messages. The first piece of information that caught Dalton's attention was the timing of Leslie's last call, which occurred early that evening, just a few hours before she disappeared. The location signal from the call originated from the cell tower east of the town of Whitesburg, in the mountainous edge area bordering Highway 119. The data showed no movement of the mobile device out of that tower's coverage area. In other words, the phone never crossed the boundary between Whitesburg and Cumberland. Dalton frowned, cross-referencing the county's cell coverage map. He drew an arc representing the signal range, which overlapped with the Line Fork Creek area and the pass that had been marked in the initial search plan. The technician in charge explained that if Leslie's phone had remained active after leaving town, the system would automatically hand off the connection to the next tower near Cumberland, but the data stopped completely at the first tower. This meant either the phone was turned off or it lost signal immediately upon leaving that area. Dalton requested an expansion of the check to include location history from the 2 previous days for comparison of travel patterns, and the results showed Leslie had regularly traveled between the 2 towns without any signal issues. The sudden loss of connection on the day of the incident was unusual. He asked for a grid-style coverage map to be printed to precisely identify the boundary where the signal stopped, while also circling the priority search area. On the map, the new red circle fully encompassed the low valley along Line Fork Creek, where the rescue team had previously reported signs of a landslide. Dalton pointed to that spot and said briefly to the SAR team leader, "We're going back here. The phone data stops right at this edge." He requested the addition of a temporary signal receiver to test how deep into the hilly terrain the phone might have fallen or been turned off. The technical team explained that signals in this area were often interfered with due to the steep terrain, but the complete lack of any response signal after the last point indicated the device had ceased functioning entirely. Dalton reviewed Leslie's contact list from the day she went missing and saw only 3 calls, 1 to her mother in the afternoon, 1 to Tim that went unanswered, and the final call lasting less than 10 seconds to the same mother's number, the one that was interrupted. He noted the estimated times between calls, calculated travel distances, and asked himself why did the signal stop so early when the distance between the 2 points was just over 20 miles. In a quick afternoon meeting that same day, Dalton presented these findings to the investigation team. He asserted that the phone, not leaving the Whitesburg area, was the first evidence suggesting the victim may have encountered an incident shortly after leaving town, rather than on the way to Cumberland, as initially assumed. The group agreed to adjust the search area, narrowing it westward, focusing on the Line Fork Creek Valley and surrounding side roads. Dalton requested coordination with the rescue team to rescan the steep roadside areas along the pass where a vehicle fall was highly likely. The technicians transferred all data into the state police's positioning system, creating a map simulating the route and signal loss point. When the screen displayed the 3D model of Pine Mountain, a small red streak marked where the phone disconnected. Dalton stared at the image, his fingers lightly tapping the table. He called the rescue team leader, ordering deployment the next morning, and to bring high-powered magnetic detectors and metal detectors. All information related to Leslie's communications was filed separately in a newly opened dossier, labeled Communication Data, Primary Evidence. Before leaving the office, Dalton wrote at the end of the day's report, "Victim's phone signal stopped in the eastern Whitesburg area. No movement toward Cumberland. Incident likely occurred around Line Fork Creek. Need to re-examine the scene." Outside, rain began to fall again, heavy drops pounding on the office's metal roof, and distant thunder echoed from the Pine Mountain Range, where the Ford Maverick still hadn't been found. The next morning, the sky over Pine Mountain was covered in gray clouds, thick humidity creeping down into the valleys. After a brief meeting at the command office, Sheriff Gene Dalton ordered the deployment of the second search wave, concentrating all forces on the Line Fork Creek area, where Leslie Grant's phone data was confirmed to have disconnected, and which was also the landslide zone marked in the previous report. The rescue convoy, consisting of 3 trucks and 2 specialized vehicles, departed at 7 a.m., carrying high-powered metal detectors, magnetic field meters, anchoring ropes, shovels, and portable water pumps. The overnight rain had made the ground slippery, the narrow pass roads eroded into deep ruts, and the tires had to be chained to prevent sliding. Dalton rode in the lead vehicle, his eyes fixed on the fogged-up map. Upon reaching the marked area, they set up a temporary staging point under an old abandoned ranger station's metal roof. The Sarah team split into 2 directions. One group followed the trail down the mountainside, the other skirted along the small stream feeding into Line Fork Creek. Light rain began to fall, thick fog obscuring nearly all visibility. Radio chatter mixed with the pattering rain on helmets. The first group gradually descended to the previously noted landslide area. The black mud mixed with clay sank nearly to mid-calf. Fallen trees lay scattered, broken trunks covered in wet moss. The metal detector technician activated the device, scanning from the edge of the slope downward, with intermittent beeps. They dug test holes at suspicious spots, but only found rocks mixed with roots. One officer noted in the field log, "No large objects detected, only signs of fresh soil erosion." Meanwhile, the second group scanned along the stream bank, where water rushed fiercely and swirled from overnight accumulation. They deployed marker buoys for the current, checked depth with measuring poles, but found no unusual objects under the murky water. Dalton received reports via radio, voices mixed with wind. No stable metal responses, only intermittent interference, ground very soft, unable to dig deep. He ordered a temporary halt to probing due to the risk of further landslides and instructed the team to collect mud samples for analysis to check for paint, oil, or any artificial materials. Near noon, the rain intensified, thunder booming through the forest. Everyone took shelter under the metal roof, raincoats caked in mud. Dalton reviewed the map, redrawing the survey area boundaries, noting the suspicious location was directly below a high-slope section of the pass road, where ongoing soil subsidence would be very dangerous. As the rain eased, he led a small group back to the original spot for another check. The mud had thinned, the ground spongy underfoot, each step producing squelching water sounds. A technician used a probe rod, inserting it nearly 20 centimeters deep into the soil, only hitting gravel fragments. No metal structures detected. They continued along the bank, spotting signs of fresh landslides, a newly exposed section of red soil, still streaked with water. Dalton ordered this area marked with plastic stakes and GPS coordinates, recorded for monitoring changes. The sky gradually darkened, cold wind sweeping down from the pass, bringing heavier rain. A warning came over the radio from the group on the pass road. Water flowing strongly, soil eroding, recommend evacuating the area. Dalton immediately ordered withdrawal, moving all personnel and equipment back to the ranger station. On the way back, wheels sank deep, requiring winch towing. Water poured down from the slopes in torrents, carrying leaves and branches. By the time they reached the staging point, the rain had turned into a major storm, lightning flashes briefly illuminating the mountainside. Dalton gathered everyone, conducted a head count, then temporarily closed the suspected landslide area, posting danger warning signs. He recorded the entire sequence in the minutes, second-day search at Line Fork Creek. Accessed marked landslide area. No large objects detected, only fresh mud subsidence. Bad weather, risk of further landslides. Temporarily suspend operations. The report was faxed to the county office before full darkness. As the rescue vehicles started and left the area, fog rolled down again, enveloping the entire valley, the sound of rain blending with the heavy engine noise, echoing through the pine forest, closing a tiring day without any additional signs of the missing vehicle. After the search team was forced to suspend operations due to bad weather, Sheriff Gene Dalton returned to town to continue interrogating the remaining loose ends in the file. Among them, Tim Grant was still the most mentioned figure, the last person to see Leslie and the two children before they vanished. The next morning, Dalton sent a notice requesting Tim return to headquarters for a second interrogation, this time with assistance from a polygraph examiner from the State Investigation Center. The session was held in a small room behind the main office, with only 3 people present: Dalton, the machine operator, and Tim. The atmosphere was heavy, the wall clock ticking loudly. Tim sat upright, hands on the table, electrodes attached to his wrists, chest, and fingertips. The examiner explained the procedure and asked baseline questions to check physiological responses. Everything proceeded normally until the main questions were posed. Dalton observed the fluctuating chart on the screen. For questions related to the time of leaving home and the marital relationship, Tim's heart rate increased slightly but remained stable. However, when shifting to questions about the current location of Leslie and the 2 children, the indicators immediately fluctuated strongly. The chart lines wavered abnormally, skin conductance spiked suddenly, breathing became irregular. The examiner glanced at Dalton, noting the results. He asked him if he wanted to pause for a few minutes. But the man shook his head, saying softly, "I'm still okay." The test continued, and the physiological response pattern repeated similarly for the final 3 questions. Do you know where your wife and children are? Are you involved in their disappearance? Did you touch Leslie's vehicle after she left? All 3 times the chart showed clear abnormal reactions. When the test ended, the examiner removed the equipment, printed the results, and noted, "Unstable responses, unable to conclude truthfulness." Dalton took the printout, skimmed it, then asked briefly, "Do you want to explain these inconsistencies?" Tim looked at him, eyes shadowed with dark circles, replying quietly, "I'm just stressed. I haven't slept well for days. Everyone thinks I did something." Dalton didn't respond, only nodded to the officer to record the minutes. He asked further about the evening Leslie left. Was anyone who saw him at home or leaving afterward? Tim repeated his previous statement, saying he had been at a friend's until about 9, then returned home and went to sleep. Dalton requested the friend's phone number for verification, but when called, the person said they only met Tim for about half an hour before heading out. This timeline didn't match the prior statement, though it wasn't enough to conclude deception. Dalton noted the discrepancy in the report. After Tim left the room, he sat back with the polygraph examiner to review the charts. The expert affirmed that Tim's physiological responses couldn't be considered random, but per regulations, the lie detector was only supportive evidence, not admissible for prosecution. Dalton took the record, folded it, placed it in the file, then reopened Tim's initial statement for comparison. Both were nearly identical, except for how he described the sounds before Leslie drove off. In the first, he said he heard the engine start. In the new one, he said he only heard the door slam shut. That small difference led Dalton to add a red note in the margin. Outside in the hallway, light rain fell again, wind whistling through the glass. Dalton stood up, looking out, his mind heavy. He knew the polygraph results would only heighten suspicions, but he had no physical evidence, no debris, no skid marks, no signs of crime. All data ended at the same point: a woman, 2 children, and a vehicle vanishing in the mountains during rain. As the clock neared 5 p.m., he signed the minutes, adding a brief summary to the day's report. Polygraph results unstable on questions related to victim's location. No physical evidence for prosecution. Continue monitoring subject. The dim yellow light in the room reflected on the table, casting shadows on the damp-edged files, while the metallic smell from the electrodes still lingered in the air, like an extension of the interrogation that hadn't truly ended. When the polygraph results were added to the file, Jean Dalton knew the case was reaching the limits of what they could do. Persistent bad weather forced continuous search suspensions, the SR team was exhausted, and the clues gathered over the past week led nowhere. He called a summary meeting at the county office on Monday morning, inviting the entire command group, technicians, and fire department representatives. On the meeting table was the spread-out Pine Mountain map, dotted with red pins marking scanned areas. Dalton opened with statistics: 7 days of searching, over 30 miles of mountain roads checked, 12 landslide zones surveyed, no large objects or accident signs. The technical team reported that all mud, water, and debris samples contained no vehicle paint, engine oil, or related artificial materials. Phone data only confirmed the signal stop at the Whitesburg Edge, with no new locations. A witness officer reported no one else saw the Ford Maverick after the time described by residents near Line Fork Creek. All information halted at the same time frame, as if the vehicle and its 3 occupants vanished right on the road. Dalton drew a straight red line on the whiteboard, marking the boundary between verified and uncheckable areas. He said briefly, "No vehicle, no evidence, no new witnesses." The entire highway, 119 and side branches, have been scanned at least twice. The room's atmosphere was heavy. Everyone understood the search was at a deadlock. The SR leader suggested temporarily halting operations until better weather, as wet soil and mud were constantly damaging equipment. Dalton nodded, also requesting a comprehensive report be submitted to the state police office. He collected the notes, gathered unused scene photos into a separate folder, then sat alone after everyone left. Outside the window, the sky was overcast, fog drifting across the mountainside, the forest shrouded in drizzle. Dalton turned on the recorder, dictating the conclusion for the final minutes. After 8 days of search deployment, no vehicle or traces related to the victim located. No physical evidence determining cause or location of disappearance. Temporarily conclude field operations, maintain open file until new data. He paused for a few seconds, looking at the piled documents on the table, then signed under preliminary conclusion. The Leslie Grant case file was moved to the county's storage cabinet, grouped with other Appalachian missing persons cases. The last page in the folder clearly printed a handwritten line in black ink, "Location or cause undetermined." As he turned off the light and left the room, the dim hallway light reflected on the brass plate bearing case number #KY08117 on the door. A file temporarily closed amid the gray rainy season of Pine Mountain. After the summary report was approved, all documents for the Leslie Grant missing person case were transferred to the storage department of the Letcher County Sheriff's Office. The maps covered in red pins were taken down, rolled neatly into tubes, along with search minutes, phone signal printouts, and scene photos bound into 5 separate volumes, sequentially numbered, labeled Case File #KY08117 Missing Person. The office staff sealed the file with the county's stamp and placed it in the 4th row of the iron storage cabinet in the back room, where unresolved cases were kept long-term. On the cover of the final volume, the handwritten note, "No physical evidence located, case inactive," was added per regulations. Jean Dalton conducted a final check, signing off on the transfer to storage. He glanced at the archive index, seeing the Grant case listed between 2 older missing persons cases, just another entry in the endless list of people who had vanished in these mountains. As Dalton left the storage room, only the dim yellow light shone on the silent row of metal cabinets. Upstairs, Deputy Dana Holt, the officer in charge of communications technology in the search team, still sat at her desk, reviewing GPS data files saved on her personal hard drive. She opened the digital map, zooming into the Line Fork Creek area, the location marked in the landslide report, but never fully accessed due to heavy rain. The coordinates appeared in the screen corner: 37°0518 DIN, 82°58, 41 din. Holt printed a small copy, folded it, and tucked it into a separate folder with several satellite images and topographic road maps she had saved on her laptop. In the notes section she wrote briefly, "Suspected area. No field check. Possible vehicle fall." As Dalton passed her desk, Holt simply said, "I'll keep a technical copy in case we need to reference it." He nodded, saying nothing more. That afternoon, the sheriff's office returned to quiet. The command boards were wiped clean. The whiteboard blank, no more pins or markings. On Holt's desk, the small map folder was placed in a private drawer, labeled Reference Copy. As she turned off the light, hallway light shone through the door crack, reflecting on the wall with the search and rescue team photo, where Leslie Grant's face and those of her 2 children still remained in the unremoved missing person bulletin. Downstairs, the storage room was locked. The iron doors click, echoing dryly in the long hallway, marking the moment the case officially entered storage, with no ongoing investigations open. Jean Dalton stepped out to the parking lot in the fading afternoon light, took a deep breath, then looked toward the Pine Mountain Range hidden in thick fog, where all traces of the disappearance bearing case number KY08117 had begun, and temporarily ended. Starting in early 2009, the disappearance case coded KY08117 was officially classified as inactive by Letcher County, alongside dozens of other long-standing missing persons cases in the mountainous region of eastern Kentucky. Over the next 2 years, there were no further reports related to Leslie Grant, her 2 children, or the old Ford Maverick. Calls to the missing persons hotline were cross-checked, but yielded no new leads. The search and rescue team returned to their routine duties, assisting with traffic accidents, flash floods, and forest fires. Jean Dalton continued serving as sheriff, while the Grant case existed only as an archived file in the office's iron safe. During periodic inventories, the records clerk would pull the file to verify its status, check the sequence number, and return it to its place, with no updates beyond the note. No new evidence. The photo of Leslie and her 2 children on the bulletin board gradually faded, and the missing persons flyer began to curl at the edges due to the humid weather. Upstairs, Dana Holt kept her own technical copy in a drawer, occasionally reviewing it when new searches were launched around Pine Mountain. She noted that the Line Fork Creek area was frequently affected by flooding, with rapidly changing terrain, but due to limited funding and the case no longer being prioritized, no one suggested resurveying it. In the 2010 report from the sheriff's office to the state, the cold files section briefly listed Grant, Leslie, family of 3, missing since February 2008. No progress. Everything stood still, like the damp, cold air of the mountain passes in winter. Locals still mentioned the disappearance as an old, sad story, each adding details from memory, and the tale gradually faded. By the end of 2010, when the file was transferred to long-term storage, the external label was changed to gray, marking it as archived. In the internal database, the Grant case was reduced to a single code line on the electronic spreadsheet, no longer mentioned in operational meetings. Jean Dalton would occasionally glance at the old photo while passing through the hallway, but then quietly walk on. The storage room ultimately closed in the smell of damp paper and metal, with rows of cabinets aligned straight, each bearing a long sequence of numbers, as cold as the winding roads leading into the Pine Mountain region, where for the past 2 years, not a single trace of the disappearance had been found. In March 2011, a prolonged heavy rain caused water from the Pine Mountain Range to rise abnormally high, with small streams feeding into Line Fork Creek, overflowing and turning the area into a raging torrent. Flash floods swept through the southern lowlands, carrying mud, tree trunks, and debris, eroding both banks of the creek. On the morning of the 4th day after the rains, a resident living on the edge of the Line Fork Valley named Harold Watts called the Letcher County Sheriff's Office to report that he had seen a metallic object protruding from the ground after the water receded. According to his description, it was round, gray, and only partially exposed on a newly formed eroded bank near the foot of a small bridge connecting to a side road. The report was logged in the daily incident book, and since that area had appeared in the Grant case search reports, Gene Dalton decided to send 2 deputies and a technician to investigate. The sky that day was still overcast, the ground saturated with mud up to the ankles. When they arrived, the creek water was still flowing swiftly, and the western bank had lost nearly 2 meters of soil, exposing red clay and tree roots. Amid the mud patches, the metallic object indeed protruded, reflecting dim light. One deputy used a small shovel to clear the surrounding soil and identified it as the curved bottom of an old rusted steel drum with jagged, torn edges. They flipped it over. It was empty, with no signs of vehicle paint or mechanical parts. The field report noted briefly, "Object identified, steel drum, no connection." The object was photographed for the file and left in place. After receiving the confirmation, Dalton directed that the report be closed and filed under environmental debris rather than evidence. However, for Dana Holt, who had by then been promoted to technical sergeant, the information caught her attention. On the area map she had kept in her drawer for 3 years, the location described by Harold Watts matched almost exactly the suspicious point marked during the 2008 search, where the rescue team had been unable to access due to flooding. She pulled out the old map for comparison, cross-referencing the coordinates in the new report, 37°0517 N, 82°5843 double, differing by no more than 50 meters from the hand-marked spot. Holt printed an additional copy, outlined the area in red pen, and noted on the margin, "Ground erosion visible, area disturbed after flood 2011. She knew the inspection confirmed it was just a drum, but the erosion at the exact suspicious location was still noteworthy. That same afternoon, she submitted her technical note to the internal system, tagged "for reference only." Dalton reviewed it, signed off, but did not add it to the investigation category since the Grant case was still considered closed. In the field, the floodwaters continued to wash away large chunks of soil along Line Fork Creek's banks, creating new long slide marks, with some side roads deeply flooded and temporarily blocked. Locals discussed how the creek changed course, but for the investigative agency, the event was recorded merely as another harsh spring weather phenomenon in Appalachia. All reports that week mentioned landslides, fallen trees, and property damage, with the description of the metallic object relegated to a small footnote at the page's end. By the end of the month, when the water fully receded, the eroded bank dried, the mud cracked into slabs, and no one returned for further checks. The discovered object was partially reburied in the soil, blending with rotten wood and drift debris. At the office, Holt saved the coordinates in a personal file, along with printed field photos from the technical team's camera. Below the date entry, she added the final line, "Flood aftermath, erosion confirmed. Potential area for future inspection." As she closed the file, late sunlight shone through the rain-streaked window, reflecting on the metal desk and highlighting the red pen outline around Line Fork Creek, a small point on the vast Pine Mountain map, where the water seemed to have just reminded everyone of something that, for 3 years, no one had truly looked at a second time. 4 years after the 2011 flood, the Line Fork Creek area had gradually recovered, with vegetation regrowing over old slide scars, while the Grant family disappearance had completely faded into oblivion in Letcher County's storage system. In early 2015, the Kentucky Department of Justice launched the Cold Case Unit, a collaborative project between local sheriff's offices and the state forensic lab to review unsolved cases from the past 2 decades. With federal funding allocated for modernizing DNA databases, county sheriff's offices were required to re-examine lists of inactive files involving violence or unexplained disappearances. When the notification arrived at the county, Dana Holt had succeeded Gene Dalton as sheriff after his retirement. She was the first to review the list of eligible cases. Among hundreds of thick files, the name Grant Leslie KY08117 was in the yellow highlighted group, categorized as missing family unresolved. Holt reopened the old file, The yellowed pages still bore Dalton's signatures and the conclusion, "No physical evidence located, case inactive." Inside, the Line Fork Creek map had faded red ink, and her 2008 handwritten note was still clipped in the middle. She reread the entire file, from search reports to phone data, then paused at the 2011 flood event, minutes she had added. Erosion confirmed, potential area for future inspection. Holt pondered for a few minutes, then drafted a proposal report to the state, requesting reinvestigation of the Grant case under the criteria, possible foul play, evidence location pending verification. In the petition, she emphasized that the initial search area was limited by weather conditions and inadequate technology, while proposing the use of modern survey tools like GPR and stratigraphic analysis. The proposal was sent at the end of February, accompanied by all technical files, field photos, and coordinates she had preserved for 7 years. In early April, feedback from the state's cold case unit arrived. File KY-08117 was approved for initial reinvestigation. In the letter, the state required recollecting DNA samples from the victim's closest relatives for entry into CODIS to compare with previously stored unidentified samples. Holt contacted Leslie's mother, now over 60, and living in Cumberland. The meeting took place in the small office at the county headquarters, in a somber atmosphere. The elderly woman signed the consent form, her hand trembling on the DNA collection consent line. The buccal swab was sent to the Kentucky State Police Forensic Lab the same day, along with identification files for the 2 children. While awaiting system entry results, Holt organized the county's new cold case review team, directing them to refilter all disappearances without recovered vehicles, focusing on 2005-2010. She noticed many cases shared patterns: mountain roads, rain, steep terrain, and old vehicles. From this, Holt compiled a separate statistic for the Pine Mountain region, where the Grant case was the only one involving disappearance of both vehicle and occupants without crash evidence. By mid-May, the lab notified that Leslie's relatives' DNA samples had been processed and officially entered into the National CODIS database, with a unique identifier code. Holt filed the letter, signing DNA reference submitted and archived. Concurrently, she received state notification of small funding for mountain counties to conduct field surveys for cold cases, prioritizing areas with previously recorded suspicious coordinates. Holt immediately submitted a proposal for 3 locations around Line Fork Creek, with detailed descriptions of terrain, soil type, and landslide history. Her report was deemed technically compliant and approved for on-site survey using handheld GPR. For Holt, this was the first time since 2008 that the Grant case was mentioned in an official plan. She stood in the records room, looking at the worn-cornered file pulled from the cabinet, feeling both familiar and distant. In her duty log entry for May 16, 2015, Holt wrote briefly, "Case KY-08117 reopened under cold case unit review. DNA family samples entered in CODIS, preparing for field survey. Line Fork Creek." Outside, spring winds gently blew through the office window, distant trees swaying, while the old case number plate was placed back on the desk, marking the moment a file dormant for 7 years was officially reopened. After file KY-08117 was approved for reinvestigation, Sheriff Dana Holt spent the entire first week of June 2015 reviewing all original documents related to the Grant case. She cleared her desk, spreading large format printed maps and 2008 notes signed by Gene Dalton himself. Under the yellow light of the storage room, each old page revealed blurred ink and faded red markings. Holt sequentially compared each topographic map with digital data stored in the state's new GIS system. When zooming into the Highway 119 route layer, she noticed the coordinates around Line Fork Creek, where the SR team had marked suspicion, were only noted as restricted zone, inaccessible due to weather. No detailed report confirmed the area had been surveyed. She turned to the second map, reprinted after the final search, and saw the area blank, without pen marks or team assignments. For verification, Holt accessed the 2008 search logbook, finding February 18, noting heavy rain. Survey paused in landslide area. At the page's end, a technician's handwritten note. Metal detector positive but unstable, site left due to heavy rain. This detail matched the coordinates in her personal map, the low slope near the confluence of Line Fork and a tributary flowing to the Cumberland River. Holt marked the spot in red, then checked current satellite imagery for terrain changes. In the new photos, an oval depression was clear, with darker soil on both sides, likely old landslide traces. She printed the image, overlaying it on the 2008 map. The outlines matched almost perfectly. Holt entered a note in the internal report. Area between Line Fork Creek and Secondary Ridge, not verified in 2008, requires resurvey. That afternoon, she presented this finding in a brief meeting with 3 technicians and a state cold case unit representative via video. On screen, Holt pointed to the coordinates, explaining it was the only area never surveyed with modern equipment. She proposed using handheld ground-penetrating radar for subsurface scanning, utilizing the approved funding. The state agreed, requesting a detailed plan, scan scope, personnel, timeline, safety procedures. In the plan, sent the next day, Holt divided the suspicious area into 3 parallel survey strips, each 30 meters wide and about 100 meters long, covering the entire eroded slope. She scheduled the scan for early July, when weather was drier and creek levels lower. GPR equipment would be supplied from the State Technical Center in Frankfurt, along with 2 operators. After plan approval, Holt returned to the old records to check further. She opened the 2008 field photo file, including a distant shot of the rainy mountainside, with dark soil and faint metallic glints. Below the photo, Dalton's note remained, no confirmation, likely debris. Holt zoomed in, spotting an odd curved bright patch on the left edge, unclear if rock or metal. She attached a copy to the plan board, next to Line Fork Creek, pending verification. The familiar feeling arose, as it was the same area where, in 2011 post-flood, a resident reported a protruding metallic object. All old data seemed to converge on one point. Holt called the state's GIS technician, requesting 3D processing of the latest terrain imagery for slope and depth confirmation. Results arrived that evening. The suspicious area averaged 37 degrees slope, with 4-5 meters surface soil over shale, likely good for GPR reflection. She reviewed, signed, and forwarded all documents to the state office for equipment prep. Before leaving, Holt gazed at the large map on the desk, new red outlines blending with faded predecessor marks. Her report's final note was concise: area previously omitted from search, to be surveyed using GPR for subsurface anomalies. Target: Line Fork Creek Valley. As she turned off the light, late-day sun slanted through the narrow window, reflecting on the map cover and flashing exactly where she had marked, a small but persistent point, refusing to vanish after 7 years in silence. In early July 2015, with dry weather and stable temperatures, the Letcher County Survey Team, along with 2 technicians from the State Cold Case Unit Center, brought ground-penetrating radar equipment to Line Fork Creek for subsurface scanning. Sheriff Dana Holt was directly on site, overseeing the entire process. The sky was clear, wind light, ground still damp, but without new slides. The area was cordoned with yellow caution tape, spanning over 100 meters covering the marked valley slope. The handheld GPR unit, on a rubber-wheeled frame, had antennas scanning in a raster pattern, data streaming to the technician's tablet. Holt stood behind, eyes fixed on the screen showing gray-white reflection waves. For the first hour, soil layers appeared even and smooth, with only minor signals from rocks or roots. As the team moved to the second zone, near her noted erosion zone 2011, the device detected unusual fluctuations. A thick, curved reflection band extended nearly 10 meters at depths of 15 to 18 feet below surface. The technician zoomed in, suggesting a high-density metallic object in old compacted mud. They rescanned perpendicularly for shape confirmation, and the 3D model revealed a structure roughly matching a mid-size car body, about 4.2 meters long, nearly 1.8 meters wide, rectangular with rounded ends. Edge reflections indicated continuous metal shell, consistent with vehicle frame rather than drum or fragments. The technician reported directly to Holt, who immediately ordered recording all coordinates, screenshots, and raw GPR signals to hard drive. She noted in the field log, strong metal reflection detected at 15-18 feet, approximate shape, consistent with vehicle chassis. As scanning expanded nearby, reflections faded, confirming the object was confined to a narrow area. By midday, intense sun dried the ground. The team paused to recalibrate equipment. Holt sat by the old creek bank, overlaying GPR results on the 2008 map. The points matched perfectly. Adrenaline surging, she paused silently, then called the county office to confirm the initial find. For legal procedure, she contacted the county prosecutor and judge's office for an excavation warrant, submitting the preliminary technical report. In the urgent request, Holt wrote, based on GPR results of July 3, 2015, indicating large metallic object, suspected as vehicle body in Line Fork Creek area, request approval for site excavation to determine object nature and potential relation to disappearance. KY 08117. While awaiting response, technicians collected 3 additional edge scans to average soil depth. Data showed 5-6 meter overlay from slides, with lower mud and gravel, consistent with pre-2011 burial by flood. All parameters supported the object being buried before the major 2011 rains. As the sun tilted west, Holt received a call from the office. The judge had signed the supervised excavation warrant, valid for 3 days. She informed the team, folded her documents, then turned to the red-staked area. Beneath the silent soil, the newly detected metallic signal lay undisturbed, as something that had slept for 7 years. Before leaving site, Holt final-checked equipment, ordering the suspicious zone secured with netting and no-entry signs. On the drive back, strong valley winds carried damp earth smell and insect buzz, her mind replaying the GPR screen image, a clear metallic reflection block, rounded front, square rear, dimensions matching an old Ford Maverick. That evening at the office, Holt wrote a summary report, backed up technical data to storage drive, and signed the conclusion. Preliminary GPR results indicate subsurface metallic object, approximating vehicle dimensions. Excavation warrant approved for July 4, 6. As she set down the pen, the printer's steady hum filled the quiet room, and light reflected on the old photo of Leslie Grant, hanging above the desk, the young woman's face still gazing straight out, as if awaiting an answer no one had found in 7 years. Early morning on July 4, 2015, while fog still blanketed the Line Fork Creek Valley thickly, the convoy of the Kentucky State Forensic Team, along with the Letcher County Crime Scene Investigation Unit, advanced into the marked area. Sheriff Dana Holt was present from early on, wearing a reflective vest, standing next to the yellow caution tape surrounding the old landslide site. The excavation warrant had just been approved the previous evening, and the entire area was classified as Level A, Special Evidence Handling. The sky was clear, a light breeze, the ground still damp after the nighttime rain. The technicians set up 2 temporary tents, arranged generators, lighting, recording cameras, and GPS coordinate measuring equipment. Every excavation step was documented, photographed, and stored in the investigation database. The forensic team began by cutting away the thick brush growing around the suspected point, then used a small excavator to gradually remove layers of soil. After nearly an hour, the surface soil layer about 5 meters thick was cleared away, revealing a dense dark brown mud layer. A technician with a metal detector conducted a scan, and a clear signal rang out. Holt signaled to pause the excavator, requesting manual digging with small shovels to avoid damaging the object below. Each layer of mud was carefully removed, the smell of damp earth mixed with metal rising strongly. Near noon, as the sun rose high, the shovel blade struck something hard. Everyone stopped, cleared the covering mud, and under the reflecting light appeared a patch of faded green painted metal. Holt approached, bent down to observe, her palm lightly touching the still wet mud on the surface. It was the roof dome of a car, buried deep in the earth, the old paint peeling in patches, but the contours and size matched perfectly with the model displayed on the GPR. The technical team used soft brushes to clean the surrounding area, gradually revealing the doorframe and shattered rear glass. As the vehicle shape became clear, the faint Ford logo was still imprinted on the trunk lid. One of the technicians exclaimed softly, "Maverick, 74 model." Holt stood motionless for a few seconds, then ordered to expand the excavation area to expose the entire vehicle body. By early afternoon, the car was dug out of the pit, front wheels sunk deep, chassis dented, the front end crushed against a large rock mass. The forensic team proceeded to take panoramic photos, measurements, then opened the driver's side door using cutting tools. When the door swung open, a stream of damp cold air and the smell of rusted metal escaped. No one said a word. Inside the cabin, the front seats still had their rusted frames intact, the dashboard covered in dried mud. On the driver's seat was an adult human skeleton, the pelvis and skull still in sitting position, arms hanging down, the rotted seatbelt draped across the shoulders. In the back seat, two smaller skeletons lay on their sides, bones fractured and separated due to the pressure of earth and water. A child's red plastic bracelet was still caught on the seat frame. The air thickened in silence. Holt stepped back a few paces, ordering the forensic team to seal the area. The investigators immediately set up additional barriers, establishing a 30-meter radius safety zone. A fixed camera was placed for continuous recording. The scene report began to be read aloud. Coordinates 37°05, 17 in 82°58'43 1. Discovery of metal object identified as 1974, Ford Maverick automobile, green color, buried 5.4 meters below ground surface, containing 3 human skeletons inside. All procedures were filmed and signed on site. The forensic team recorded detailed footage of every angle of the vehicle cabin, collecting intact evidence: key frame, glass fragments, a small canvas shoe, and half a broken rear license plate. Readable numbers: LCH27. The vehicle chassis number data was confirmed to match the registration records of Leslie Grant's vehicle. One of the technicians read the quick check results, voice choking. Vane confirmed, "This is Grant's car." Holt nodded, her face expressionless. She turned to the report team, requesting immediate sealing of the area, prohibiting all media access. 2 forensic personnel in full protective suits proceeded to take soil samples around the vehicle for burial timing analysis. The skeletons were recorded in position, photographed, and transferred out using specialized bags, numbered in order. In the scene logbook, a new line was added: excavation confirmed vehicle and human remains consistent with missing subjects of case KY08117. When the car was lifted out of the pit, using a small crane, mud slid down both sides, exposing the entire rusted body under the sunlight. Everyone stood still, only the creaking sound of metal and the recording camera. Holt gazed at the scene for a long time, hand gripping the notebook tightly. She knew this was not just a technical discovery, but the end of 7 years of silence. When evidence collection was complete, the area was covered with tarps, 2 officers guarding 24 hours. The final daily forensic report was signed on site, stamped by the county and Sheriff Holt's signature under the confirmation line. Scene sealed, evidence preserved. Excavation of 1974 Ford Maverick. 3 bodies in cabin. Coordinates match missing persons case KY08117. Late afternoon, the last sunlight shone on the swaying yellow tapes, reflecting on the old car body just pulled from the earth. The final evidence of a journey that for 7 years had only existed in the dusty files of Pine Mountain. The skeletal samples were transferred that same night to the Kentucky State Medical Examiner's office in Frankfort under the supervision of 2 investigators and a cold case unit representative. The next morning, the expert team began preliminary examination. The bone samples were cleaned, separated, and numbered by collection position. Marrow and molar samples were selected for DNA extraction, compared with reference data stored in the CODIS system since 2015. Initial analysis results were completed within 48 hours. The first DNA sample matched perfectly with Leslie Grant's profile. The remaining two matched genetically in a mother-child relationship with this woman. The report was sent directly to the Letcher County Sheriff's Office, confirming the identities of the three missing victims from 2008. Simultaneously, the mechanical technician team began physical analysis of the Ford Maverick vehicle recovered from the scene. The chassis was heavily rusted but retained its structure. Mechanical inspection showed no signs of strong impact on the front or sides, no cracks on the undercarriage, no scraped paint or deformation consistent with a traffic accident. Tires were intact. No punctures, steering axle straight, airbags not deployed. All data ruled out falling or crashing due to loss of control. The driver's side door was locked from the outside, the mechanical lock undamaged, but the latch slightly bent broken. The right rear door was also locked, while the key found on the driver's floor was in the off position. This led the investigation team to suspect the vehicle was intentionally locked after the three people were inside. In analyzing the interior cabin, the forensic team found no mud splatter on the dashboard, indicating the vehicle was stationary when buried, not swept away by flood. The toxic gas report was conducted in parallel. Rib bone samples and remaining soft tissue in the driver's seat were analyzed via gas chromatography for compound traces. Results showed abnormally high carbon monoxide levels, residuals up to 48% in the marrow, corresponding to lethal asphyxiation in a confined space. Inspection of the vehicle interior surface revealed black residue on the vent openings, identified as unburned gasoline soot, possibly generated when the engine ran in a non-ventilated environment. The laboratory's preliminary conclusion stated clearly, cause of death consistent with CO asphyxiation, no detection of impact trauma or pre-death violent injury. This report left Holt silent for a long time when reading the final line. She understood that a traffic accident did not exist at all. This was an intentional act. State criminal police were invited to assist in reanalyzing the scene. They examined the burial pit shape, determining the vehicle was buried under mud due to secondary landslide, meaning soil collapsed after the vehicle was already buried. No tire skid marks or impact, proving the vehicle did not plunge from the mountain road, but was brought to this position by another method, possibly towed or pushed when the ground was soft. From this data, forensic analysts concluded the vehicle was in a sealed lock state when the landslide occurred. Doors locked from outside, engine running long enough to accumulate CO causing all three victims' deaths. One specialist commented, "No accident, no suicide. This action was clearly intentional." The comprehensive report was completed 3 days after excavation, attached with scene photos and DNA results table. In the conclusion section of the minutes, the lead forensic expert wrote, "Identification confirmed as Leslie Grant, Timothy Grant Jr., Julie Grant, no traumatic injuries, elevated CO levels consistent with carbon monoxide poisoning. Vehicle locked externally, probable homicide, disguised as accidental burial." Holt signed receipt of the copy, placing it in the official file for case KY08117. On the cover, preliminary forensic assessment was stamped in red. During the internal meeting at the end of the day, she reread the summary to the entire team. "We have 3 victims, a vehicle with no collision cause of death. CO asphyxiation, doors locked from outside. This is not an accident. This is murder and staging." No one in the room spoke, only the sound of pens scratching paper as she wrote the final sentence in the report. Preliminary evaluation: homicide with intent to conceal through simulated accident. Outside, the Pine Mountain sky gradually turned to dusk, dim light shining through the window glass, reflecting on the thin dust layer on the brass plate, engraved with case number KY08117. A case forgotten for 7 years, now returning as a reminder of something much larger than a vehicle buried in the earth. Immediately after the preliminary forensic report determined this was a staged murder as an accident, Sheriff Dana Holt returned to the office to review the entire original 2008 file, aiming to determine why the Line Fork Creek area, where the vehicle was found, had never been thoroughly surveyed during the initial search phase. She requested opening the archive storage, retrieving the entire file coded KY08117, along with attached technical appendices, including search maps, preliminary ground-penetrating radar reports, and inter-team SAR communication logs. As she spread the yellowed old papers on the desk, Holt quickly noticed that in the initial positioning map set, areas marked for search in red pen only covered 2/3 of the road between Whitesburg and Cumberland. The remaining part, the area around the Line Fork Creek confluence, was cut off by a faint pencil line, with no survey team symbols, dates, or confirmation signatures. She flipped to the Terrain Survey, February 17, 08 report, prepared by the technical lieutenant at the time, realizing the report file lacked all radar scan data for this area. The note at the end of the page only stated briefly, "Imaging discontinued due to weather." However, in the communication logbook Holt found in another drawer, there was a handwritten entry on the same date. Radar Unit 3 malfunction, reassigned to Route 119 Sector B. This proved the technical team had paused surveying the creek area due to equipment failure, but never returned afterward to complete the map. She checked the next day's coordination minutes, discovering an erroneous line. The Line Fork Creek area was mistakenly merged into Route 119 Sector B, which was the main road area already scanned previously. This data entry error left the entire streamside lowland blank in the comprehensive report. Holt reopened the summary sheet signed by Sheriff Gene Dalton at the time. In the Summary of Covered Zones section, it stated, "All sectors verified by Field Units 1, 3, and right below was the completion checkmark." She tapped her hand on the desk, feeling a chill when realizing that just a small discrepancy in the mapping phase had excluded the actual vehicle-containing area from the search scope for 7 years. Continuing the search, Holt discovered the technical data file SAR Imaging, February 2008, stored on the office's old drive, containing radar image files with format errors. When recovering them with modern software, she clearly saw the final frame displayed the northern mountainside of Line Fork Creek with status incomplete scan, signal lost. She printed the image, pasted it next to the new map, and marked in red pen, segment omitted. Procedural oversight. At this point, the full picture of the error became clear. In 2008, when weather turned bad, the radar team withdrew and transferred equipment to another route. Incomplete data was mistakenly recorded as checked. Dalton, at the time, under time and weather pressure, signed confirmation based on the comprehensive report without detecting the missing part. Holt felt a bitter mix of anger as she reread each line. She understood that if that year the area had been scanned properly, the vehicle could have been discovered in just days, and the case would not have dragged on for 7 years. She immediately prepared an internal review report detailing the procedural error and supporting documents. In the assessment section, Holt wrote, "Failure in data integration between Field Unit and Central Log caused exclusion of target zone Line Fork Creek from official search coverage. Procedural error confirmed." The 3-page report was attached with copies of recovered radar images and original communication logs. She sent this document to the State Cold Case Unit office with a letter requesting recognition of the technical error in the 2008 archived file to prevent future recurrence. When printing the final copy, Holt stood up looking out the window, light rain falling on the headquarters yard, the scene similar to the first nights of the search years ago. In her mind, only one repeating thought: the vehicle was never lost. It had been lying there from the beginning, obscured, not by terrain, but by a small procedural discrepancy that no one noticed for years. After completing the report, confirming the procedural error in the 2008 search phase, Sheriff Dana Holt immediately shifted focus to the criminal investigation phase. With forensic results affirming this was a staged murder as an accident, she sent a letter to the Kentucky Attorney General's office requesting reopening file KY08117 under coordination with the FBI Louisville branch. Less than a week later, A federal state investigation team was established, including 3 FBI agents specializing in historical crimes, 2 cold case unit investigators, and the state forensic technical team. Holt served as chief coordinator, responsible for data synthesis, evidence management, and providing all original county files. Right in the first meeting at the Letcher County headquarters, she presented the entire case timeline again, from the 2008 missing persons report, failed search efforts, to the 2015 excavation results. When the projection screen displayed photos of the mud-buried Ford Maverick, the room fell dead silent. The agent in charge of family crime investigation, Richard Keene, assessed that elements in this case showed signs of controlling behavior and premarital violence. So all statements from the husband, Tim Grant, from the initial phase needed re-examination. Holt agreed and assigned the specialist team to review all original interrogation transcripts, especially the 2 taken on February 13 and 15, 2008. Old audio copies were re-extracted from the tape drive, noisy sound, Tim's voice still steady, but upon close listening, one detail caught everyone's attention in the first statement. He said Leslie left home via the main highway 119, heading to Cumberland. However, in the second interrogation, he said she planned to stop at a store near Line Fork to get gas. This difference had never been emphasized in the file because at the time Line Fork was not considered a focus area, but now with the body discovery site exactly there, that detail became key evidence. Keene paused the tape, looked at Holt, said quietly, "If he knew she would stop at Line Fork, it means he was telling the truth the second time, or he was trying to conceal because he knew something happened there." Holt opened the old phone report, pointing out that Leslie's mobile signal stopped right at the edge of Line Fork Creek, matching Tim's second statement. She wrote in the analysis minutes, discrepancy in route description, subject may possess prior knowledge of victim's last known location. That same day, the investigation team expanded background information search on Tim Grant. They reviewed financial records, insurance and credit history in the period before the disappearance. The FBI report showed Tim co-signed a life insurance policy with Leslie, value $250,000, purchased only 6 months before she vanished. Additionally, he had large credit card debt, part of which was collected in early 2008. These facts strengthen the financial motive hypothesis. Holt requested Agent Keene to create a comparison table of statements with banking activity, in which they discovered another detail. Tim's card had a transaction at a small gas station in Line Fork on the afternoon Leslie left, the time he claimed to be at home watching football. This technical evidence was sufficient to request a court warrant for DNA sample and home search. Holt drafted the petition, sent to the county prosecutor for the order. In the application, she stated clearly, subject Tim Grant provided inconsistent statements regarding victim's travel route, financial motive evident, location data overlaps discovery site. Request DNA sample for comparative analysis with trace evidence recovered from vehicle. That afternoon, the search warrant was approved by the judge, along with a mandatory DNA sample order within 48 hours. 2 federal officers, along with Holt, directly went to Tim's residence, a small wooden house on the outskirts of Hazard, where he moved after leaving Whitesburg. Tim appeared calm when they read the order, agreed to provide a buccal swab, but his face showed clear tension when hearing mention of Line Fork Creek. Holt closely observed that reaction, noting in the report, subject displayed involuntary hesitation upon mention of discovery site. The DNA sample was sealed and transferred immediately to the state laboratory for comparison with microsamples collected from the steering wheel and seat belt in Leslie's vehicle. Simultaneously, the FBI team began reconstructing Tim's movement map on the day of the incident, based on credit card data, traffic cameras, and old GPS points. When piecing together the route, his path overlapped with the road leading into Line Fork Creek, exactly the buried vehicle area. Holt sat in front of that map for a long time, fingers lightly tapping the desk. She knew the investigation had now gone beyond an old accident. It was uncovering a chain of events that 7 years ago, due to a procedural error, had all been overlooked. When the meeting ended, she signed the interim report, writing the summary line, "Federal State Task Force established, primary suspect, Tim Grant, awaiting DNA confirmation." Outside, dust-covered Pine Mountain, in a copper-red wind blowing through the flagpole in front of headquarters, rattling the small chain, the clinking sound like a rhythm, reminding Holt that the journey for truth had officially entered an irreversible phase. 3 days after the DNA sample from Tim Grant was collected, the Kentucky State Forensic Laboratory sent an urgent notification to the Joint Federal State Investigation Office. The preliminary report stated clearly, hair and epithelial samples recovered from the rear seat of the 1974 Ford Maverick have nuclear DNA sequences matching the reference sample of subject Tim Grant with a probability of 99.99%. Upon receiving the fax with its blurry red stamp, Sheriff Dana Holt sat silently for a moment, her eyes fixed on the figure 99.99, a simple line of text powerful enough to shatter 7 years of silence. The hair sample had been found in the crevice of the rear seat, preserved in the upholstery fabric with its protein structure intact, due to not being submerged in water for an extended period. During examination, the laboratory extracted sufficient mitochondrial DNA to compare with the sample taken directly from Tim's oral mucosa. The results matched perfectly at 14 genetic loci, achieving the highest reliability level under federal forensic standards. The accompanying report included a DNA electropherogram chart, with the blue peaks aligning absolutely between the two samples. In the experts' comments section, the conclusion line was bolded. The probability of match to any unrelated individual is less than 1 in 10 million. Holt printed a copy and presented it to the federal team during the morning meeting. The room fell silent as she placed the documents on the table, the only sound being the slow whir of the ceiling fan. Special Agent Richard Keene quickly read through the summary, then looked up at Holt and said quietly, "We have a physical connection. This is no longer just suspicion." Holt nodded and replied, "And it places him in the vehicle at the time or immediately before the car was buried." She continued to explain that the hair was discovered in the back seat, where there was no reasonable explanation for Tim to have been, since he had claimed he had not entered Leslie's car since the morning she disappeared. This DNA evidence directly contradicted his statement and ruled out the possibility of cross-contamination due to inheritance, as the genetic sequence confirmed direct origin. From there, Holt and the investigation team agreed on the next step, obtaining a search warrant for Tim's residence and property to search for additional physical evidence supporting the criminal hypothesis. She immediately drafted an urgent affidavit to the county prosecutor, attaching the DNA report, photos of the car seat, and the evidence sealing log. In the request, Holt wrote clearly, "Forensic DNA match establishes direct physical link between suspect and vehicle discovered at Line Fork Creek. Request immediate search warrant for residents and associated properties to recover potential corroborative evidence, including tools, clothing, or vehicle parts." That afternoon, the state judge signed and approved the search warrant, valid for 72 hours, authorizing the seizure of any items related to the case or potentially containing additional DNA samples. Holt received the warrant, read every line carefully, then folded it and placed it in her briefcase. Before leaving headquarters, she called the FBI investigation team to coordinate the execution plan for the following morning in Hazard, where Tim Grant currently lived. While preparing, the technicians continued analyzing additional fabric fibers and oil residue samples from the vehicle, with preliminary reports indicating hydrocarbon components similar to household motor oil, commonly used in garages. This sign led Holt to believe the car had been moved using a tow or mechanical pulley rather than sliding naturally. That evening, she sat alone in her office, the yellow light shining on the map of the Line Fork Creek area, still pinned with red markers, and a photo of Tim Grant from the 2008 file placed next to the new DNA results. She read and reread the expert's conclusion. This evidence places the suspect in direct contact with the victim's vehicle prior to concealment. All assumptions of accident, flood sweeping, or terrain error vanished, leaving only one reality. Tim Grant had been inside that car. Holt sighed, a chill running down her spine. She signed under the line "Execute Search Warrant." Priority 1, placed the file on the desk, then turned off the office lights. Outside, light rain fell on the parking lot, droplets tapping steadily on the metal roofs, a rhythmic sound like a countdown to the morning when the search warrant would be executed, and the small wooden house where Tim Grant had lived for years would become the new focal point of the case, once buried along with the Ford Maverick in the soil of Pine Mountain. On the morning of July 9, 2015, before dawn fully broke, the convoy of FBI vehicles and Letcher County Sheriff's Office entered the outskirts of Hazard, where Tim Grant's small wooden house stood isolated at the end of a muddy dirt road. The search warrant was executed at exactly 6 a.m., following strict procedures. 4 agents and 2 state troopers surrounded the area, with Holt and Special Agent Richard Keene leading the entry team. Tim opened the door in his sleepwear, his face paling upon seeing the warrant. Holt read aloud the provisions allowing a full search of the property and seizure of evidence related to case KY-08117. While 2 agents moved in to secure the living room, the forensics team began scanning for GSR and biological traces. The house had a faint smoky smell, with thick dust on the wooden floors indicating infrequent cleaning. In the living room, under an old brown rug, a small darkened area was discovered. The forensics team used UV light, revealing irregular fluorescent spots. A quick presumptive test with phenolphthalein yielded a weak positive for hemoglobin, indicating trace blood. The sample was cut out, sealed in a specialized bag, and labeled sample hash HG21A, carpet trace blood. Continuing to the kitchen, Holt noticed a scorched corner of the wall, with ash fragments and deformed metal pieces on the table, surrounded by the distinctive burnt smell of high-temperature combustion. A technician used tweezers to collect several fragments, placing them in preservation bags, noting burned metallic fragment. The ash was containerized in glass jars, noted to have a hydrocarbon odor, likely from an outdoor burn barrel. In the backyard, they discovered a homemade steel barrel, still containing unburned charcoal residue and ash, with freshly disturbed soil around it. Holt ordered soil samples from the pit next to the barrel, to be compared with samples from the Line Fork Creek scene. Preliminary field reports showed the mineral composition and silica-kaolinite ratio in Tim's backyard soil matched the burial site, indicating shared geological origin. Under the canopy of a nearby persimmon tree by the fence, an officer found a mud-caked rubber strip resembling an automotive door seal. Initial examination identified it as 1970s Ford door weather stripping. The evidence was sealed along with the burned metal pieces from inside. Meanwhile, Tim was required to sit at the dining table, his eyes fixed on the agents. When Holt asked about the rug and burned barrel ash, he only shook his head and said, "I burn trash." The quick response prompted Keene to note in his log, "Subject visibly nervous, avoids eye contact." By midday, the forensics team completed collection, seizing a total of 23 items: floor rug, ash, metal fragments, soil samples, weather stripping, and various mechanical tools from the garage. In the tool cabinet was a nearly 1-meter-long iron tow hook, with unusual wear marks, matching the size for towing small vehicles. When questioned, Tim claimed it was his father's old tool, but could not produce receipts or ownership documents. The temporary field report noted, multiple items possibly consistent with concealment tools, burn residue, and trace soil indicate connection to primary scene. That afternoon, the mobile lab sent quick analysis results on the rug, confirming mixed DNA from at least 2 individuals, one matching Leslie Grant's CODIS profile. Based on these results and uncooperative statements, the county prosecutor issued a temporary arrest warrant for Tim Grant on charges of obstruction of justice, impeding investigation, and destroying evidence. Holt signed the execution order and personally read Tim his Miranda rights in the living room as 2 officers cuffed him. Tim reacted weakly, only saying, "You're wrong," but no one responded. He was escorted to the vehicle, while the forensics team continued scanning the backyard with metal detectors. At the fence edge, they found additional broken screws and mud-caked green paint chips, matching the color of Leslie's Ford Maverick. All evidence was sealed in separate bags, photographed, and signed off. As they left the scene, Holt glanced back at the small wooden house, the lingering smell of burned barrel smoke mixing with damp earth. She knew the investigation had officially shifted from suspicion to prosecution. On the drive back to headquarters, the compiled report was entered into the system. Search executed at 6 a.m., recovered trace blood on carpet, burn residue with metallic fragments, soil sample matched to Line Fork Creek. Suspect Tim Grant arrested for obstruction pending further forensic confirmation. That evening, as Holt signed the detention order, she added a brief note at the end. Evidence indicates direct linkage between suspect's residence and burial site. Outside the window, light Kentucky rain fell, droplets tapping steadily on the office's metal roof, in rhythm with the flashing red lights of the vehicle transporting the suspect out of the lot. A moment Holt clearly understood. This time the investigation would not return to square one. The items seized during the search of Tim Grant's home were immediately transferred to the Kentucky State Forensic Laboratory and the Federal Investigation Center in Louisville for detailed analysis. Within 5 days, additional analysis results were sent back sequentially. The first report concerned the ash from the backyard burn barrel, revealing volatile organic compounds including benzene, toluene, and carbon monoxide, characteristic combustion products from burning organic material in low oxygen conditions. The ash also contained extremely small carbonized bone fragments, less than 2 millimeters in diameter, with abnormally high phosphate levels. The lab used X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy to determine composition, finding the bone tissue burned at 500 to 700 degrees Celsius, a temperature achievable only with mixed fuel containing gasoline or oil. From the recovered microscopic bone, forensic experts extracted mitochondrial DNA using next-generation sequencing, comparing it to Leslie Grant's CODIS profile. The nucleotide sequence matched absolutely with the reference, with random match probability less than 1 in 50 million. The report stated clearly, DNA fragments within ash consistent with remains of Leslie Grant. This result meant part of Leslie's body had been burned and processed in Tim's backyard. Concurrently, the living room rug sample underwent deeper examination. Experts isolated 2 blood types, one matching Leslie, the other matching an unidentified male genetic profile, highly likely Tim's. Under microscopy, localized charring on fibers indicated the blood had been exposed to high heat, consistent with the smoky odor noted in the house. Regarding the burned metal fragments, analysis showed they were parts of an old ignition coil assembly used in 1970s Ford vehicles, with oxidation traces containing lead and zinc compounds identical to those in the Maverick's recovered engine frame. Technicians concluded Tim had removed this component during disposal, possibly to erase chassis and engine identification marks. Backyard soil analysis showed complete mineral match to Line Fork Creek, including 63% silica, 21% kaolinite, and trace hematite, a rare geological structure found only on the eastern slope of Pine Mountain. This proved Tim had transported soil from the scene or vice versa, moving between locations in close temporal proximity. The separate results were compiled into a 20-page supplemental forensic report, with the conclusion stating, multiple physical evidence sources indicate sequence of events consistent with homicide, followed by partial body incineration and concealment of vehicle with remaining victims. An internal county Vietnamese summary translation noted briefly, ash DNA identified as Leslie Grant's, ash contains benzene Colorado and gasoline traces, matches body incineration, no mechanical impact wounds found, confirming victim did not die in accident. Vehicle buried to stage incident. When Holt read the final line, she set the papers down, taking a deep breath. She knew this was the missing piece completing the case picture. The matter was no longer speculation but a chain of actions established by scientific evidence. Leslie Grant was murdered, her body partially burned for disposal, the vehicle containing the children's remains towed to Line Fork Creek and buried deep to create a false scene. In the evening meeting, she briefed the federal team, projecting photos and chemical charts on the screen one by one. Special Agent Keene stated, "We have a unified chain of physical evidence, victim remains, DNA and concealment actions. This is premeditated murder, executed with clear planning." Holt noted each point, finally concluding in the compiled report to the county prosecutor, "Comprehensive forensic evidence confirms homicide and post-mortem incineration. Suspect Tim Grant directly linked through DNA, soil trace, and tool fragments." As she signed, she felt the weight of every word. 7 years of stalled investigation now closed with irrefutable evidence. Outside, dusk settled over Pine Mountain, the sky tinted a copper gray, matching the ash color the technicians had just submitted, the final trace of a crime once hidden in layers of earth and fire, now exposed by investigation and science. The interrogation of Tim Grant took place on the morning of July 16, 2015, in Interrogation Room 3 of the Letcher County Sheriff's Office, with Sheriff Dana Holt, FBI Special Agent Richard Keene, and the county prosecutor present for legal oversight. The room was equipped with 2 cameras, and the entire session was continuously audio recorded. Tim sat across from Holt, lightly cuffed, his face gaunt and eyes ringed with dark circles after nights in detention. The atmosphere was thick, broken only by the ticking clock. Holt began in a low, calm voice, reading his legal rights, reminding him of his right to remain silent and to an attorney. But Tim shook his head, saying he wanted to hear what they had to say. Holt placed sealed evidence envelopes on the table one by one: the DNA match, ash analysis results, scene photos, and forensic reports. She slid the first photo toward him, a picture of the rusted Ford Maverick, freshly excavated, dented body with faded green paint mixed with mud. Tim stared at it intently, blinking rapidly, hands clasped. Holt said nothing more, silently sliding the second photo. Inside the vehicle, 3 numbered skeletal remains, the driver's seat still bearing a crossed seatbelt. "We know who they are," she said slowly, "and how they died." Keene, seated behind, read excerpts from the report. Carbon monoxide detected in bone marrow, locked from the outside, car buried intentionally. Tim remained silent, breathing heavily. Holt leaned forward, voice low but firm. "We found your hair in the car, DNA match, 99.99%, and ash in the barrel behind your house, containing Leslie's DNA." At the mention of his wife's name, Tim flinched slightly, eyes darting to the door, then down. Holt continued, voice colder. "You said you were home that night, but your credit card was used at Line Fork. Backyard soil matches the burial site. Rug in your house has her blood. There's no doubt left, Tim." She paused, staring directly at him, eyes hard. "Do you want to tell us what happened that night?" For several minutes, only the soft hum of the air conditioner. Tim clenched his fists, nails digging into skin. As Holt began to stand to end the session, he spoke hoarsely. I didn't mean to." Both investigators paused. Holt sat back down, signaling the technician to start supplemental recording. Tim's voice trembled as he began. He said, "Leslie arrived home earlier than expected to pick up some kids' items, and they argued about divorce and custody. She said she would leave Kentucky with the 2 children, never letting him see them again. Tim lost control, pushed Leslie, causing her to fall. When she lost consciousness, he panicked, dragged her to the car, intending to take her to the hospital, but when the children cried, he panicked further, started the engine and locked the doors. Then, he stopped, voice choking. Holt asked, "You left the engine running, didn't you?" Tim nodded, eyes red. "I thought, just a few minutes. I didn't think the gas could kill them that fast. When I opened the door again, it was over." He covered his face with his hands, breathing ragged. Keene asked, "What did you do after?" Tim stared blankly at the metal table, speaking like in a trance. "I towed the car down the valley, buried it. I burned the clothes, the rug, everything with blood. I thought the rain would wash it all away." Holt kept her voice steady, asking, "Why not call the police?" He gave a faint, soundless laugh. "Who would believe me? A man arguing with his wife. She dies in her own car. 3 lives. I thought I could hide it." The room fell silent, only the recording light blinking red. Holt leaned in, confirming, "You're admitting you caused the deaths of Leslie Grant and your 2 children." Tim nodded without looking up. She read back the statement, requiring him to confirm he understood and was volunteering it. He signed shakily on the transcript. Holt closed the file, signaling to stop recording. The wall clock read 11:47 a.m., ending 4 continuous hours of interrogation. As 2 officers entered to escort Tim back to holding, he glanced back at the photo on the table. Leslie and the 2 children smiling brightly in an old frame from the 2008 missing persons file, then lowered his head and walked silently. The interrogation recording was backed up to the county's secure drive, labeled Confession, July 16, 2015, archived with all evidence transcripts. In the investigation log, Holt wrote the final line, "Subject confessed to homicide, statement recorded and archived." Outside, light rain fell over Kentucky, water droplets beating on the interrogation room window, reflecting the still-on lights. A faint glow after 7 years shrouded in darkness and silence. After the audio recording of Tim Grant's confession was authenticated and backed up, the Kentucky State Prosecutor's Office proceeded with criminal prosecution under the special procedure for retroactive cases involving federal elements. On July 22, 2015, the Chief State Prosecutor, Eleanor Pike, signed the indictment against Tim Grant on 3 counts of first-degree murder under Section 507.020 of the Kentucky Penal Code, including intentionally depriving Leslie Grant and her 2 minor children, Timothy Jr. and Julie Grant, of their lives, and 1 additional count of obstructing justice and tampering with physical evidence under Section 524.100. In the 12-page indictment, the prosecution outlined the established chain of evidence, DNA analysis, matching the suspect to the physical evidence, blood traces in the home, cremated remains containing accelerant materials, along with Tim's voluntary confession during the formal interrogation on July 16. Accompanying documents included the full forensic results, search records from 2008 to 2015, excavation transcripts, and GPR technical data identifying the location of the buried vehicle. The state prosecutor's office simultaneously submitted a request to the Kentucky Supreme Court to transfer jurisdiction to the Lexington County Interdistrict Criminal Court, the venue for trying Class 1 criminal cases involving particularly serious offenses. The reason for the transfer was the collaboration between federal and state authorities, requiring a panel of judges experienced in cold cases. When the notice was sent to Letcher County, Sheriff Dana Holt officially handed over the physical evidence files and all original data to the court's storage department, as required. On the morning of the transfer, the county office was enveloped in a heavy atmosphere. The evidence boxes labeled Evidence KY08117 were sealed with red tape and loaded onto a specialized truck. Holt signed the final handover protocol, confirming that all 142 pieces of evidence, 5 DNA samples, 3 storage devices, and 1 confession recording had been transferred to Lexington. Local media quickly reported on the story. Cold case: Pine Mountain reopened after 7 years, suspect charged with triple homicide, stirring public opinion in the Appalachia region. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office issued a brief statement. The available forensic evidence meets the standard for criminal prosecution. Our goal is to ensure justice for the victims. A short press conference was held in Lexington, where Pike confirmed the maximum penalty under the law: life imprisonment without parole or the death penalty, depending on the jury's decision. Tim Grant was transferred from the Letcher County Detention Facility to the state prison in Lexington that same evening, escorted by 2 state troopers and 1 federal agent. There, he was provided with an appointed public defender and awaited the preliminary hearing. The charging documents clearly presented the incriminating evidence. The the voluntary confession, DNA matches with 99.99% probability, blood traces on the home carpet, ashes containing Leslie's DNA, and backyard soil matching the geological sample from the vehicle burial site. The indictment concluded, the defendant, with deliberate intent, caused the deaths of Leslie Grant and her 2 minor children, and subsequently engaged in acts of concealment and evidence destruction to impede law enforcement. When Holt reread the copy, she felt a mix of relief and heaviness. After 7 years, all efforts to uncover the truth had finally reached a legal outcome. She noted, in her duty log, case transferred to Lexington County Circuit Court for prosecution under state jurisdiction. Outside, the late afternoon light shone on the fog-covered Pine Mountain ranges where the entire story had begun and ended. In the county storage room, the small wooden box containing Leslie's family photo remained in its original place, a silent reminder that case KY-08117 had left the investigation phase and entered the final stage of the journey toward justice. At the Lexington County Interdistrict Criminal Court, preparations for the formal trial in the case of State of Kentucky versus Tim Grant proceeded urgently and rigorously. In August 2015, the state prosecution coordinated with the Joint Federal-State Investigation Team to review the entire chain of evidence to ensure legal validity for each item before presentation in court. Every DNA sample, physical item, crime scene photo, and audio recording was rechecked for seal integrity, handover dates and times, and confirmation signatures, ensuring no discrepancies in the storage process. The court's evidence room allocated a separate area for storing the KY-08117 files, totaling 142 sealed items, including 37 physical objects, 12 biological samples, 9 soil samples, 18 combustible materials, and 3 electronic devices. The forensic technician team created a tracking log for each item, numbered sequentially from #001 to #142, with each piece of evidence accompanied by original photographic copies. Holt, as the primary witness and lead investigator, was summoned to Lexington to assist in finalizing the file. She worked with prosecutor Eleanor Pike to review every section, DNA records, crime scene photos, toxic gas test results, the confession, and the full audio recording. In the evidence room, Holt examined the now familiar items, the old floor carpet sample, the jar of ashes containing Leslie's DNA, charred metal fragments, and photos of the buried Ford Maverick. Each detail was cross-checked against the original protocols, confirming the collection location, receiving officer, and transport route. Upon completion of the review, the chain of custody was fully certified by the prosecution, ensuring all evidence could be used at trial without procedural objections. Afterward, the prosecutor outlined the structure of the charging file. Part 1, Forensic Evidence, comprising 5 sections: DNA, toxicology, crime scene, soil samples, and mechanical materials. Part 2, Circumstantial Evidence, comprising 4 sections: financial, behavioral, timeline, and route. Part 3, Direct Evidence, the recorded and handwritten confession. In the over 600-page dossier, the first section was the DNA analysis report from the Kentucky State Forensic Lab, Tim's hair matching the sample in the back seat, Leslie's blood on the carpet, her mitochondrial DNA in the ashes, and backyard soil matching the Line Fork Creek sample. The second section was the toxicology results from the Institute of Forensic Science, bone tissue from Leslie and the 2 children containing 48% carbon monoxide, indicating death by asphyxiation in a confined space with the engine running. The report included photos of soot in the vehicle's exhaust pipe. The third section included all crime scene photos, excavation diagrams, GPR maps, and video footage of the direct vehicle recovery process, a sequence of images showing the vehicle's intact condition, doors locked from the outside, and seatbelts still fastened. The fourth section was Tim's confession, with transcripts confirming voluntariness and his signature. The audio recording was backed up in 3 copies, one submitted to the court, one retained by the state, and one reserve at the FBI. Once the court's internal verification system was complete, Prosecutor Pike officially filed the case on August 25, 2015, marking the pre-trial evidence review phase. Holt was required to attend as the primary witness, recounting the investigation process and explaining the technical steps leading to the crime scene discovery. In the preparation meeting, Pike emphasized that the trial strategy would focus on the logical chain of evidence from DNA to concealment actions, culminating in the voluntary confession. No single element stood alone, but together they formed an irrefutable system of proof. That afternoon, Holt signed the protocol confirming evidence integrity. The bold final line in the document read, "Chain of custody verified. Evidence admissible under Kentucky Rules of Criminal Procedure, Section 901. The entire file was packed into 3 large boxes, labeled in red "To Court," Evidence Room A, and sealed with the court's lead stamp. As Holt stepped out of the evidence room, the Lexington courthouse hallway was quiet, with only the sound of wind whistling through the old windows. She paused before the brass plaque reading "Commonwealth of Kentucky, Circuit Court," and for a fleeting moment felt that the 7-year journey in search of justice had reached its final threshold. Outside, dusk cast a pale bronze hue over the stone steps, and in the records room behind, the KY-08117 files were neatly arranged, awaiting the day in court, where every piece of evidence would be presented publicly under the clear light of the law. On October 14, 2015, the Lexington County Interdistrict Criminal Court opened the public trial in the case of State of Kentucky v. Tim Grant, presided over by Judge Harold Vance and a jury of 12 randomly selected members. The courtroom was packed, with local media and representatives from domestic violence prevention organizations in attendance. The front row was reserved for Leslie Grant's family, where her elderly mother sat silently, clutching a photo of her daughter and 2 grandchildren. As police escorted defendant Tim Grant in, the room fell completely silent. He wore a gray prison jumpsuit, head bowed, hands cuffed in front. Before opening arguments began, State Prosecutor Eleanor Pike presented the formal indictment to the court: 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of obstructing justice, and tampering with physical evidence. She opened with a statement: "This case is not only a tragedy for one family, but also a testament to the persistence of justice. 7 years of silence could not conceal the truth." She outlined the forensic evidence chain, starting with DNA results, confirming Tim Grant's presence in Leslie's vehicle, ashes containing her DNA, blood found in the home, and backyard soil matching the vehicle burial site. Crime scene photos, excavation video, toxicology charts, and GPR maps were projected on the large screen. The courtroom fell silent as images appeared of the rusted Ford Maverick being pulled from the pit. The prosecution continued with the toxicology report. Victims died from carbon monoxide asphyxiation. Engine still running, doors locked from the outside, undeniable evidence of intentional act. Finally, she played the audio recording of Tim's confession, his trembling voice clearly echoing in the interrogation room. "I didn't mean to do it. I left the engine running. They died." When the audio reached that final sentence, Leslie's elderly mother broke into sobs, silencing the entire courtroom. The defense attorney attempted to argue that the act lacked intent to kill, claiming it was an accident due to panic, citing Tim's unstable mental state at the time. However, the prosecution countered with evidence of subsequent preparation, burning the bodies, burying the vehicle, and erasing traces, demonstrating full awareness and intent to conceal. After 3 days of examination and evidence presentation, the jury was asked to deliberate on the charges. Before they retired, Tim unexpectedly stood and requested to speak. His voice hoarse, eyes sunken, he said briefly, "I have nothing left to justify. I take responsibility for what I did." His lawyer advised him to consider pleading guilty to avoid the death penalty. That afternoon, in a closed session, Tim officially signed the plea agreement, accepting all 4 charges, in exchange for the prosecution withdrawing the death penalty request and recommending the maximum sentence of life without parole. The next day, Judge Vance returned to the bench, voice grave. Defendant Tim Grant, you have admitted before this court to intentionally causing the deaths of your wife and 2 children, while also destroying evidence to conceal the crime. Pursuant to Sections 507.020 and 524.100 of the Kentucky Penal Code, the court sentences you to life imprisonment without parole. The sound of the gavel echoed throughout the courtroom. Tim stood motionless, eyes fixed on the floor, while sobs rose from Leslie's mother's side of the gallery. The judge continued, "Justice may come late, but it comes. This is a reminder to all citizens that the truth cannot be buried forever." After the sentencing, police escorted Tim from the courtroom in absolute silence. Prosecutor Pike bowed to Holt and the investigation team, saying quietly, 7 years, and finally, justice has spoken. Holt only nodded, her eyes still on the empty seats where the Grant family had sat. That afternoon, newspapers across Kentucky ran headlines. Cold case of Pine Mountain closed, husband sentenced to life without parole, accompanied by photos of police leaving the court with thick case files. In the court office, the verdict was entered into the system with the note, "Verdict final, life imprisonment without parole." The KY-08117 file was stamped, closed, and sealed in the state archives. As Holt left the courthouse, the Lexington sky was clear after days of rain. She paused on the steps, looking south, where Pine Mountain faded in the sunlight, then quietly departed, carrying a feeling both heavy and relieved. Justice could not bring back the dead, but at least the truth was no longer buried under the cold mud of Line Fork Creek. 1 month after the trial, Sheriff Dana Holt returned to the Letcher County office to complete the final summary report for case KY-08117, the official document marking the closure of one of Kentucky's longest-running missing persons files. She sat alone in her office, morning light filtering through the blinds, the first page titled Case Closure Report, KY-08117, placed neatly on the desk. Holt began typing line by line, recording the entire 7-year investigation process, from February 9, 2008, when the disappearance was reported, to October 14, 2015, when the life sentence without parole was pronounced. The report's introduction outlined the context. The case began as a missing persons report involving Leslie Grant and her 2 minor children, initially classified as a traffic accident in adverse weather conditions. Due to errors in the survey process and technological limitations in 2008 searches, the Line Fork Creek area, where the vehicle was later found, was not fully scanned with radar, resulting in the case being classified as inactive for many years. Holt continued describing the turning point in 2015, when the state's cold case unit was established and the ground-penetrating radar scanning program was implemented. Thanks to GPR technology, the investigation team identified a metal signal 18 feet underground, matching the dimensions of the victim's 1974 Ford Maverick. Subsequent excavation confirmed the presence of the vehicle, along with 3 sets of remains. She detailed the forensic results, from CODIS DNA confirmation to toxicology reports, indicating death by carbon monoxide asphyxiation, establishing the element of intentional murder. In the findings section, Holt wrote DNA analysis, physical traces, and the confession confirmed that Tim Grant killed his wife and 2 children, processed the bodies with fire, then buried the vehicle to create a false scene. Modern DNA technology, along with GPR methods, played a key role in recovering evidence and restoring the truth. She dedicated an entire paragraph to identifying the reasons the case stalled for years: errors in data entry during the 2008 search, technical failures, and incomplete reports resulted in the Line Fork Creek area being excluded from the official search map. This procedural error was recorded as the direct cause of the lack of progress. Holt paused, looking out the window at the fog-shrouded Pine Mountain ranges. After a moment, she continued with the recommendations section, proposing improvements for similar investigations. enhanced cross-verification of field data, application of subsurface scanning technology to all steep terrain areas, and parallel storage of electronic and hard copy data to prevent information loss. Finally, in the conclusion, she typed concise yet weighty lines. The Grant family case demonstrates the importance of forensic science technology in solving forgotten files. Thanks to the coordinated efforts of Letcher County, the Cold Case Unit, and FBI Louisville, justice was served for 3 victims after 7 years of obscurity. The 2008 error will be remembered as a professional lesson, and the 2015 success proves that no crime can be buried forever. Holt signed at the bottom, Dana Holt, Sheriff, Letcher County, Kentucky, then affixed the official office seal. The original report was sent to the Kentucky Department of Justice, with a copy retained in the county archives. As she placed the file in the cabinet, the small box containing the photo of Leslie and her 2 children remained in its place, next to the brass plate engraved KY08117. Holt gently closed the cabinet door, the sound of the metal lock echoing like the wind from Pine Mountain, marking the complete closure of a once-forgotten file that had finally been brought into the clear light of truth and justice. In November 2015, shortly after the case closure KY08117 summary report was submitted, the Kentucky Department of Justice initiated a mandatory internal review to examine the responsibility of individuals involved in the procedural errors during the 2008 search. The purpose of the investigation was to determine whether there was intentional omission, record manipulation, or procedural violation leading to the incomplete survey of the Line Fork Creek area. The review team consisted of 3 state judicial inspectors, 1 independent legal expert, and a representative from the governor's office. All original records, communication logs, and 2008 SAR team journals were seized for analysis. Over 2 weeks working at the Letcher County headquarters, the inspectors interviewed officers who participated in the 2008 search operation, including retired former Sheriff Gene Dalton, who had retired in 2012. Dalton fully cooperated, presenting his personal notebook, which included notes on weather interruption and equipment failure, coinciding with the radar team's withdrawal from the Line Fork area. He admitted to mistakenly signing sector completed based on an unverified summary report, but insisted he was completely unaware of the missing data and had no motive to conceal. The inspectors cross-checked coordination logs and clearly identified a technical error due to radar data storage software failure during a power outage in the rainy night, causing one data sector to display verified, despite being incomplete. The conclusion report stated, "No evidence found of intentional manipulation or omission of the search area." The error stemmed from operational failure and severe weather conditions. Additionally, the investigation confirmed no signs of administrative interference or cover-up from command levels. The entire process at the time complied with 2008 state search standards, despite technological limitations. In the recommendations section, the Department of Justice required circulation of a warning memorandum to all local police departments regarding data review before signing completion confirmations, and mandatory retraining in data verification procedures for county-level SAR teams. The final conclusion was released on December 3, 2015, determining that Gene Dalton bore indirect professional responsibility, but no intentional violation. He was recommended to note the error in his service record, with no criminal or civil pursuit. When the communique reached the Letcher County office, Holt read every line carefully, then signed the acknowledgement section, reviewed and acknowledged. In the summary conclusion of the internal report, the final line read, "Operational error confirmed. No concealment intent." Case serves as procedural precedent for SR documentation standards. That same day, Dalton sent a handwritten letter to the county office, thanking the investigation team for resolving the case and expressing regret for the past error. Holt read the letter, then placed it in the Grant case archive next to the copy of the closure decision. Outside, early winter fog began covering the slopes of Pine Mountain, wind whistling through the old power poles with a dry yet clear sound. A sound reminding that even if mistakes exist, the truth will ultimately be found and recorded as it truly is. In January 2016, after completing an internal audit and comprehensive evaluation of case KY-08117, the Kentucky Department of Justice officially issued a new set of guidelines for investigating missing persons cases and handling cold case files across all 120 counties in the state. The document, numbered KDJ 2016-04 and signed by the State Attorney General, emphasized three key areas of improvement: standardizing crime scene search procedures, expanding the use of geophysical technology, and strengthening federal-state coordination mechanisms. In the introduction, the document directly cited the Grant case in Letcher County as a typical example of how a minor data error had caused a file to remain stagnant for nearly a decade. The state government required all local police departments to mandatorily implement a cross-verification system for search data, with at least 2 independent approval levels for each surveyed area. At the same time, operational maps had to be digitized and stored simultaneously at the state data center to prevent loss or damage. The most prominent feature of the guidelines was the integration of ground-penetrating radar technology into standard investigation procedures. For the first time, the state of Kentucky allocated a dedicated budget for geophysical scanning equipment, prioritizing mountainous counties where steep terrain, landslides, and complex soil and rock conditions often hindered search operations. Under the decision, the fiscal year 2016-2017 budget increased by an additional $2.3 million for the GPR for Rural Search Units program, with Letcher, Pike, Harlan, and Breathitt counties ranked in the highest priority group. The document also mandated training for all search and rescue personnel on interpreting GPR signals, data storage, and coordination with forensic laboratories to process results. Alongside this, an advanced training program for cold case investigators was launched at the State Forensic Center in Frankfort, focusing on next-generation DNA analysis skills and reconstructing old technical files. The accompanying financial report stated clearly, GPR and DNA technology are no longer supplementary tools, but mandatory standards in all unexplained missing persons cases. These improvements were seen as a direct consequence of the Grant case, where the combination of DNA data and radar technology brought a seemingly hopeless file back into the light. State media outlets unanimously reported on the new plan, calling it the Appalachian Reform Package, an initiative to expand investigative technology into mountainous areas with limited infrastructure. In Letcher County, Holt received an invitation to attend the announcement conference in Frankfort as a witness and representative of field forces. In her speech, she briefly shared, "The truth does not lie in chance, but in data, and technology is the only way to look back at the past accurately." That statement was quoted in the Department of Justice's press release, serving as a conclusion to a period of change. Within the industry, the new guidelines became the standard document for the entire state, requiring counties to build their own electronic databases and periodically report progress on missing persons investigations overdue by more than 6 months. The Cold Case Unit Office was expanded with 2 additional branches in eastern and southern Kentucky, each equipped with fixed GPR systems and mobile expert teams. When the guidelines were announced, Holt received a copy sent to the county with a note, "This reform originated from the lessons of KY-08117. She placed the document on her desk, looking out the window at the Pine Mountain Range hazy in the mist, feeling at peace because the losses from years ago had at least brought about a concrete change for the future of investigations." In the county's archived file, Holt added the final line to her January 2016 duty log, "Procedural reform enacted. Technology ensured justice." Outside, snow fell lightly, covering the headquarters yard in white, and in that quiet light, past and present seemed to blend together, one side marked by errors, the other by progress, connected by the hard-learned lessons from the Grant case. In March 2016, after the new state guidelines officially took effect, the Kentucky Department of Justice issued Administrative Decision Number 06 KY 2016, confirming the completion and permanent closure of investigation file. KY-08117, under the status ULSD 2016, triple homicide. This document was regarded as the final step in the entire process that had lasted more than 8 years, closing a case that had prompted the state's justice system to comprehensively review search procedures and missing persons file handling. At the Cold Case Archive headquarters of the Kentucky Justice Department in Frankfort, a special storage room was designed for cases resolved using modern forensic technology. File KY-08117 was among the first transferred to this new vault. 3 sealed evidence boxes with red stamps, along with 2 main case files nearly 700 pages thick, were handed over, according to federal standards. Holt was present at the handover, signing the final confirmation minutes in front of representatives from the Department of Justice and the archive manager. On the catalog plaque hanging outside the steel shelf, the words Grant, Leslie et al., Letcher County, 2008-2015, triple homicide were printed in bold, with a QR code for data access. Simultaneously, the state's electronic database system updated the case status, displaying it in the Cold Case Resolved Files section with the description, Case Reopened 2015, solved through GPR and DNA identification, resulting in life sentence without parole. In the accompanying internal report, the Department of Justice noted that the Grant case was used as a training model for cold case investigator courses at the state and federal levels. Original documents, from GPR maps to excavation photos, were digitally backed up under identifier JDC 117KY for professional research purposes. Holt stood in the storage room, watching the technician affix the completion seal to the third evidence box, the light reflecting coldly off the metal surface. In that moment, she realized that all the years of perseverance, the disappointing searches, and the insistence on data had finally converged here, in a neat line reading a solved 2016. As the minutes were stamped, she signed her name one last time, under submitting officer, then gently closed the file. That afternoon, Holt returned to Letcher County, stopping her car along Highway 119, where she could see the Pine Mountain Range covered in white clouds. In her duty log, she wrote the final entry for the Grant case, file KY-08117 archived under Department of Justice Cold Case Archive, status solved, justice delivered. The spring wind blew through the pines, carrying the scent of damp earth and the low hum of the wind, the familiar sound of Appalachia, a place that had once swallowed a family and ultimately returned the truth to them. Inside the archive building in Frankfort, the automatic indicator light on the case shelf blinked green, confirming that the system had saved all data. The Grant case was officially closed, not just on paper, but in the memory of the entire state of Kentucky, as proof of Holt's words once written in a report. No crime is buried forever, only justice requires more time to find its way back. In June 2016, the Kentucky Department of Justice released the first comprehensive report on the Cold Case Initiative program, evaluating results achieved after 1 year of official implementation across the state. In the introduction, the over 80-page report highlighted case KY-08117, also known as the Grant family case, as a prime example of the successful application of modern forensic science technology in retrospective criminal investigations. The report clearly identified 2 decisive technologies: ground-penetrating radar systems and next-generation DNA analysis. Under the Technical Achievements section, the document detailed how the Letcher County investigation team used GPR to detect metal reflection signals at depths of 15, 18 feet in the Line Fork Creek area, leading to the discovery of the buried Ford Maverick. This was considered the first time in Kentucky's judicial history that a missing persons case was fully solved using geophysical technology. The technical footnote stated, GPR application in mountainous environments allows detection of vehicles buried deep under mud, where traditional mechanical methods cannot reach. The obtained data has accuracy within 30 centimeters, supporting precise excavation positioning. Alongside this, the forensic DNA correlation section described the process of matching DNA samples from victims' relatives stored in the CODIS system since 2015, with bone samples extracted from the scene, confirming the identities of Leslie Grant and her 2 children. Next-generation sequencing techniques were also recognized as an advancement that enabled DNA recovery from burned ashes and carbonized bone samples, something nearly impossible with 2008 forensic technology. The report affirmed that the combination of GPR and DNA analysis has created a new investigation standard for cold cases in Kentucky, paving the way for reinvestigating hundreds of unsolved files. Under the Operational Impact section, the document analyzed the broad effects of the Grant case on the forensic system and law enforcement agencies. Within 1 year of closing KY-08117, a total of 27 other cold cases had been reopened statewide, with 8 identifying victims or vehicles thanks to GPR and DNA technology. The report also noted that the $2.3 million budget increase for radar equipment had been allocated effectively, equipping 14 Mountain SR units fully. At the Cold Case Unit Center in Frankfort, a special training program named Grant Protocol was established, serving as a model to guide new investigators on coordination between local forces, forensic labs, and federal agencies. In the curriculum, the Grant case was presented as an exemplar from reviewing old files, identifying procedural errors, to deploying GPR excavation and DNA analysis. The materials described each phase with real photos, scene diagrams, and original GPR data, allowing trainees to practice a complete investigation process. In the conclusion, the report summarized, the Grant case has redefined procedural standards for forensic reinvestigation in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. It demonstrates that with the integration of technology, perseverance, and cross-agency collaboration, justice delayed can still be justice delivered. This sentence was widely quoted in regional judicial seminars, becoming the slogan for the state's cold case program. Holt, as a representative of local investigation forces, was invited to speak at the release ceremony in Frankfort. She said briefly, "What technology achieves is not just finding evidence, but restoring truths that were once buried." After the ceremony, the report was officially archived at the Cold Case Archive Bureau, marking the event where the Grant case was formally recognized as a model file. In the appendix, the document affirmed not only delivering justice to one family, case KY-08117 has laid the foundation for Kentucky's modern criminal investigation model, where technology becomes the central tool of truth. As Holt left the Department of Justice building that day, the freshly printed report was still warm, its cover bearing the black lettering Cold Case Program Review 2016, Kentucky Justice Department, and below it a concise note, dedicated in memory of Leslie Timothy Jr. and Julie Grant, whose story changed the way Kentucky seeks the truth. The Leslie Grant case is not just a story about a crime concealed for 7 years, but also a profound reminder to American society today of the value of perseverance, technology, and transparency in law enforcement. A small data entry error in 2008 that caused the Line Fork Creek area to be overlooked led to 3 lives being forgotten for nearly a decade. Only when ground-penetrating radar technology and next-generation DNA analysis were applied did the truth emerge from the cold earth. From that detail, Americans can see that scientific progress is not just a symbol of modernity, but an ethical tool. It allows justice to find its voice even when humans have failed. Additionally, the story of Sheriff Dana Holt, who persistently reopened the file, reviewed every minor error, and refused to accept case closed as an ending, reflects the sense of responsibility that the American public service system needs to maintain. In today's context, when public trust in government agencies is often challenged, the Grant case proves that transparency and data verification can restore that trust. It also serves as a reminder to every citizen: believe in the value of truth, no matter how much time and effort it takes to uncover. For the community, the story emphasizes the importance of investing in forensic technology, especially in rural Appalachia areas where infrastructure remains limited. The final lesson of the Grant case is justice never comes on its own. It requires perseverance, honesty, and a society willing to examine its own mistakes to move forward. If you believe that justice always finds its way back no matter how long it takes, Please hit subscribe to join us in continuing the journey of exploring cases illuminated by the light of truth. Thank you for following the story of the Leslie Grant case. See you in the next video, where we will continue to uncover mysteries once buried in America's past.